In this episode, we're going to show you how to fly the Gladiator Star Destroyer.
This is the captain. Brace for impact.
So as per usual, there's two variants of the Gladiator. There's the Gladiator 1 class Star Destroyer. Comes with 5 hull, 2 command, 2 squadron value, 3 engineering. Has 3 shields on the front, 2 on each side, and 1 on the rear. Can go speed 3. Has 2 black dice, 2 red out the front, 4 black out of each side, and a black and a red out the rear. Has 1 blue anti-squadron, and for defense tokens comes with a brace, a redirect, and an evade. For upgrades, it has an officer slot, a weapons team slot, a support team slot, and an ordnance slot, and it costs 56 points. So the Gladiator 2 class Star Destroyer is pretty much exactly the same. The only difference is that it has an extra blue dice for any squadron flak, and then out of each side it drops 1 black dice and replaces them with a red. And then for this it increases points to 62. So the Gladiator comes with 3 titles. One of them is so popular it really doesn't need much introduction, but it's the Demolisher title. So Demolisher allows you to basically perform one of your attacks after you execute a maneuver. Now it's been FAQ'd that you can't do it after engine text these days, but obviously it's still an obscenely good card. And 90% of the time if you're running a Glad, you're running it as Demolisher. Hell, even 99% of the time you're running it as Demolisher. Insidious for 3 points is actually a pretty good title. It's the black dice is your battery armament. In your battery armament can be used at medium range. If you're shooting someone in their rear arc. It's a good title, but basically the only time you'd run it is if you're running a second Gladiator because you've already put Demolisher on the first one. They now, as of Wave 7, actually have access to a third title, 7th Fleet Star Destroyer. It's not gonna... I really don't think you should run it on a Gladiator purely because it doesn't help them a great deal, and also their front arcs aren't that broad. It's really meant for ISDs, but it is an option. You should consider it, but I wouldn't put too much stock into it. Most of the time, if you're taking a Glad, it's Demolisher. So before we really get into the other upgrades, much like the Mach-30, you should pretty much always be taking Ordnance Experts as your weapon team slot, as it's just incredibly good for a ship with this much black dice. So a really common build that you'll see for Gladiators is so Gladiator 1 with Demolisher, Engine Techs, APTs, and Ordnance Experts. It's a really, really hard-hitting ship, has a lot of maneuverability. With all that black dice and Ordnance Experts, it's pretty much gonna get APTs off most of the time, statistically. And with Demolisher, it can roll in and ignore the main weakness of black dice ships, which is that you have to set it up and plan it, because this you can just move in after you and shoot them. Now, if you're taking multiple Glads, this build works just as well. Of course, then you'd probably consider taking the Insidious title, as you already have Demolisher on your first Glad. But the Engine Techs, APTs, Ordnance Experts combo still really, really works quite well. Obviously, though, just without Demolisher, you have to work a little bit harder, maybe try and be first player, or sort of force them to fly into your arc. Now, if you're trying to scrimp on points, cutting engine techs to reduce it down to 75 points for this whole combo can be an option. Grand Moff Nick, or Fulcrum Nick, is a big proponent of this. I, however, am not. I think engine techs are pretty required. It's a ship that really lives and dies by its maneuverability, so an upgrade that increases this is really, really good in my opinion, but that is very much opinion. Nick believes otherwise, so, make up your own mind. Some other options to consider for the Ordnance slot alongside APTs is external racks and assault concussion missiles. External racks, if you are running a non-Demolisher Gladiator, could be a really good idea as you're less likely to get multiple shots. However, with the power of the Demolisher title, unless Demolisher dies, you're invariably going to get more than one shot, which is why we tend to recommend a critical hit effect, such as APTs or even ACMs. Assault Concussion Missiles, when the Gladiator was first released, was pretty much a mainstay. So if you score a black critical, each hull zone adjacent to the defending hull zone suffers a damage for 7 points. These days, however, most people tend to take Assault Proton Torpedoes, just because it's a bit cheaper, but also because the dealing one face-up damage card to the defender, crits can be really, really brutal in this game. So it's a little bit more swingy. But the other thing is as well, especially, it's really, really brutal against small ships, which have very low hull health, such as corvettes or anything like that. And especially also against rebel big ships, because they are also, they really rely on their shields. So this allows you to bypass that really nicely. So one of the slots that generally ends up getting cut just to save on points is the officer slot in the Gladiator. However, there is a couple of really, really good options. Intel Officer is obviously a bit of a no-brainer, as with the high damage output, it allows you to really pressure, sensitive tokens such as Brace. Coming in the new wave, Captain Brunson is a really, really good card potential for the Gladiator. The Gladiator at the moment, its main weakness is that it's a lot less survivable than its rebel counterpart, the MiG-30. And with its maneuverability, it really should be able to maintain that distance 1 to 2 of an obstacle that you need. But, having that sort of effect where while you're at 1 to 2 of an obstacle, you can exhaust the card to choose and cancel an attack die, that could be really, really, really good for a Gladiator. In a similar vein, a lot of people have used Admiral Montferrat, which is while defending against a ship, if your speed is at 3 or higher, the attack is treated as obstructed. Again, similar sort of deal, it just makes it a bit more survivable, which is really, really important for the Glad, as it's probably its main weakness. Lastly, for the officers, Skilled First Officer is another really popular choice, especially if you're a bit newer to the game, just because as a Command 2 ship, it really allows you a lot of dial flexibility, and this can be really, really important at crucial moments. Especially for 1 point, I definitely recommend, especially if you feel like you don't have a complete handle on the commands yet. But even for experienced players, it really is just a nice safety net. So the really, really good thing about the Gladiator is pretty much all of these builds work just as well with the Gladiator 1 as they do with the Gladiator 2. Obviously, you're just trading a little bit of damage on the Gladiator 2 because you're losing one of your black dice. So why take the Gladiator 2? So one of the main reasons that people really consider taking the Gladiator 2 is because of that 2 blue dice flak. It does make a big difference, especially with Demolisher, where you can do it after you move. You can set up a really nice flak arc and just go to town. And with 2 blue, it will really start to add up. So one of the other main reasons you might consider taking a Gladiator 2 is because it pairs really nicely with Jonas. So Jonas is while a friendly ship is attacking a ship at distance 1 of Jonas, it may change 1 die to a face with an accuracy icon. So obviously this is really good for the Gladiator 2 because then, although you're trading up some of your damage off your side arc, if you pair it well with Jonas, you roll your 3 black, you do obscene amount of damage, and normally this flotilla would scatter, but no matter what you roll on the red, although that was a pretty good roll, you can just automatically change it to an accuracy, kill whatever important thing they have, and really, really, really mess up that ship. In this case, almost certainly destroying this flotilla. So much like the MiG-30, 90% of the time you really just want to be setting your commands to navigate. I'm a pretty experienced player, and I just always set my commands to navigate with this ship. If you've got a bit more experience and you're judging the table correctly, you can set things like engineering or concentrate fire or even squadron command depending on the context. But obviously this requires a bit more awareness and a bit more judgment. So when in doubt, navigate it out. So on this note of setting commands, your other commands actually are really, really good. Again, it's just easier to set and navigate. But people often forget that the Gladiator has a squadron value of 2. So often, especially it's a really good little tandem with Jend and Marek, as you can just set a squadron command at the right time and throw in the super best friends to do an obscene amount of damage to soften up your target before you blast them. So with the Gladiator, because it has a speed range of 1 to 3, you pretty much always want to deploy at speed 2, and then on your first turn you want to bank a navigate token, just so you have the option to move within your full range. This also pairs really, really nicely with engine techs, as you can go from speed 1 to effectively speed 4 in one round. This can be used to catch your opponents really off guard, or to sort of hang back out of long range before diving in to close. So in terms of flying the Gladiator Star Destroyer, there's really a couple of key questions. Most of the time I'm just going to assume that you're flying it as Demolisher just because it's such a good title. But the main key question then is whether you're first player or second. And the secondary question of this is whether you out-activate your opponent. So if you're a first player and you out-activate your opponent, you can really probably just refer to our first-last video. But Demolisher really wants to be flown in a combination of first-last and blocking. So a really good example would be is if I had first-last and Demolisher, I'd fly in, get the front arc, fire off my side arc with Demolisher, and then next turn hit them again for the classic Demolisher triple tap. If you're first player and you don't out-activate your opponent, obviously you need to be a little bit more wary, as your opponent can basically always ensure that they'll get at least some form of return fire, especially with big ships which you can't really one-shot. As a result, you're obviously going to have to be a bit more cautious in your approach, but really you should basically always try and be adopting a sort of fly in, hit them hard, fly out to avoid as much return fire as possible. Now with small ships like a corvette or in particular a Nebulon, even if you're out-activated, this is less of a concern, as you can just roll in and most of the time just blow them away in that one activation. If you do that, then obviously you don't need to worry about return fire as they're already gone. Engine text can be really helpful to this, as it can allow you to put on those last couple of points of damage you need to finish the target off. Now, a lot of people think that if you're taking Demolisher, it needs to be first player, and obviously while it does really enjoy it, it actually is quite possibly one of the best second player ships in the game. And that's because it doesn't care that it's not first as much, because it can move up and shoot after it attacks. This can be really helpful, especially if you're second player and out-activated, as it gives you a means of ignoring those disadvantages a little bit. Now, obviously, you'd prefer first player and out-activating your opponent with Demolisher, but what's really nice about it is it's flexible enough to be able to mitigate that problem. So how you fly Demolisher, or any Gladiator for that matter, is often largely determined by what your opponent has brought. If they don't have any big ships or heavy hitters like a MiG-30 themselves, and they're going sort of multiple small units, then Demolisher becomes the apex predator. And that's probably its preferred state, because small ships it can pretty comfortably roll up and just blow away in one shot. So if your opponent doesn't have a big hitter that can sort of challenge Demolisher, that's how you should fly it. You should fly it like a bully. It's going to roll in, blow them off the map, and they need to be very, very wary of where they move to. If, on the other hand, they have a big ship or another heavy hitter like another Demolisher or a MiG-30, then you need to obviously be a bit smarter with it. Often, especially if they have a big ship, Demolisher won't be able to kill it outright on its own, but what it will do is it'll hurt it so badly that if you have another combat ship or some squadrons, they'll be able to come in and finish the job. So in this case, you want to roll up, unleash your torpedoes, unleash the payload, and preferably avoid as much return fire as possible. So against an ISD, you don't want to get in the front arc. Against MiG-80s, you want to stay out of the side. And against MiG-75s, you want to pray. So on this note, I have seen an upgrade combo that, while I don't personally believe in, a lot of people think is really, really good for Demolisher, because it really, really increases its survivability. And that's, you put Minister Tour in the officer slot, and then you take ECMs. Now, with its brace and its redirect and its evade, having that ECMs just means that it basically has one of the most versatile toolkits available. Obviously, again, this really, really increases its survivability, as now it can actually get in a heavy arc, like the side arc of a MiG-75, and live, because it should have access to the brace. So that's pretty much it when it comes to Gladiator. You want to use it as a close-range brawler, bullying small ships, and really, really helping the whale hunt on big ships. It has great offensive firepower, but its defensive capabilities are not the greatest, so you need to really rely on its maneuverability to help keep it alive. That's pretty much all we have for today. So if you really enjoyed this, think about giving us some money on Patreon. We're trying to get that Scarif gate. Give us some feedback, what other videos you want to see. Yes, we know you want to see an interdictor and a hammerhead. We're getting on it. But pretty much this is Intel Officer Luke signing off.